Hey, this is Scott from Watchuseek, and today we have one of the hottest releases of 2017, and that is the TAG Heuer Autavia. So we need to go back to the year 1933 when the name Autavia was first used. Heuer used it for dash counters for cars and for airplanes. And the name Autavia comes from AUT, from automobile, and AVIA, from aviation. You put the two together, you get Autavia. It wasn't until 1962 that Jack Heuer designed a wristwatch, a chronograph, reprising the name Autavia. Interesting, in 1962, it was the first chronograph with a rotating bezel. So that production ran from 1962 to 1986, which brings us to last year. In April of 2016, there was something called the Autavia Cup. And what that was is TAG Heuer had a micro website, and you could go on there. They had different rounds. I want to say it's 4 different rounds they had. There were 16 different models, and folks could vote on which model they wanted to be the next Autavia. There was over 50,000 votes. And so here, 2017 Bezel World, this watch here was released. So it is the way I want to look at this is it is not a faithful trying to reproduce the Autavias from the 60s, and it is inspired by, it's using a lot of design elements from previous watches, but it's definitely a modern sized watch here. So let's just start with the case and talk about that. So it's a 42 millimeter case. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit here. So there we go. So it's a 42 millimeter polished case. So polished sides. I don't even know if there is any brushed material on here. It is 16 millimeters high, so definitely a taller watch, and in line with your 7750s, that type of thing. We have a 21 millimeter lug width. A little odd on that. It's not that you can't find 21 millimeter straps, but it's not as easy to find as, say, a 20 or a 22. Not a deal breaker, but I thought that was pretty interesting. And then we have 50.5 millimeters lug to lug here. It does have an open back. Let's see, so you can see that there. So that is the new movement 02. We'll talk about that in a minute. It does have a bidirectional bezel. And I will say this bezel has a wonderful feel to it. It makes it's a nice positive stop. And you can see there's 12 markers here. So you could use it in addition to your chronograph setting. But realistically, for me, this is a poor man's GMT, right? So you could adjust the time. Let's say my local time is 10, and my home time, I could easily look at the dial there and say, yep, it's 6 o'clock back home. So I like that. I think that's a neat touch. So we've got the chrono pushers at 2 and 4, and then the crown, let me turn that, has the Heuer shield on there, a knurled crown. Some nice knurling on the rotating bezel there. Polished on the bottom, polished all the way around. So it does come on 2 different bracelet options. You have this guy for the strap. It's a nice strap. It really is. It has a vintage, I'll turn it this way. It has the Heuer logo there. And it's also available on a very vintage-looking metal bracelet with kind of that the grain of rice look to it. So something you don't see every day. Nice, gives it a real nice vintage look. So let's talk about the dial and kind of going back to the branding here. On the buckle, it just says Heuer. It doesn't say tag Heuer. And then the same thing is true with the dial. So the dial here, you can see it says Autavia, Heuer, and then down at the very bottom we have it says Heuer 02. So 3 subregisters in white with a black dial, black matte dial. The subregisters have a snailing pattern on the inside. So we have elapsed minutes here, we have running seconds, and then we have hours, and then a central chronograph second hand here. So I can stop and start. So stop and start here, and then reset down on this guy. There is a date at the subregister at 6 o'clock. I will say, a lot of people say, oh, they put a date in it, they put a date in it. But if you're going to put a date in something like this, I think they did a real good job. They hit it in the in this subregister here. The date dial disc underneath is white, which blends in with the subregister a little more with black printing. So all in all, it's a concession to sell watches. It's what the manufacturers have to do. People walk in the store, they'll look at a watch. If it doesn't have a date, they'll look for the next one. I think there's a small segment of people that look for watches without dates. I'm one of them, but they have to sell watches. So let's see. There is applied markers, and the applied markers have 3 basic segments to it. So there's a brushed on the top here. There is a polished bevel on the inside, and then on the outside of the marker, we have a luminova mark. So it uses a superluminova, which turns green, and it has the aged kind of brown look to it. Usually I'm not a big fan of the aged luminova look, but there's so little of it on here that it really doesn't bother me. In fact, I kind of like it. It gives a nice warmth. And the hands here also have the luminova applied to the hands, the aged. So all in all, it's a nice dial on there. And I do like the lack of tag branding. I think it gives a certain vintage look to it. It really brings it back to the older Autavias. The movement here we can see on the back. This is the Heuer 02. It is an in-house movement. It is a column wheel chronograph. So they put the column wheel in there in red. I don't know if I'll have to put a photograph of that in there. And it uses a vertical clutch. And so what the vertical clutch gives you is when you stop and start the chronograph, it gives you a very positive feel to that dial. Or I mean, not to the dial, to the seconds counter here. So let's say maybe on a 7750 chronograph movement, when you stop and start, it may jump a little bit. And this, because of that vertical clutch, it's very nice the way it stops and starts. I really do like that. The chronograph minutes jump each minute when it comes around. So it has an 80-hour power reserve, and this rotor, it's noisy. When I'm sitting in the room just reading and I move my wrist, I can hear it. It's not anything interesting. It's just like, oh, I have an automatic watch on my wrist. No big deal. So let's go back to the chronograph, and I'll move let me reset. I'm going to move this out of the way. So one of my beefs, if we go back to talk about this dial, is the minute, let me start that here, the minute subdial here. We have markings at 2.5 minutes, 5 minutes, 7.5, 10, and so on. This, and I'm sure somebody will correct me, but in my knowledge, most chronographs that I see have small minute markings for the minutes. So when this guy, we'll see as it crosses over here, there is no hash mark that this subregister, the minute subregister, is going to fall on. Now, I'm sure if I had this watch and was using it on a regular basis, you get to know where in relation to those half-minute marks, the 2.5, the 7.5, that type of thing. You'll know where your minute is, but you'll see here when it crosses over that you just kind of have to say, well, that's close to the 12 o'clock position there, or the top, and that must be 1. If it's closer to the 2.5, we're at 2. Let's see, what else would I have to say? Maybe if I'm nitpicking, I'd like it to be a little smaller, but 42 millimeters is certainly acceptable and in line with what is available as a chronograph. It does wear very nice. I'll put it on my wrist in just a second. The 21 millimeter strap size, I wish they would have gone with maybe a 22. I think 20 might have been a little too small. So let me put this on my wrist, and well, let's watch this. This guy's going to go over to 2 minutes, and 3, 2, 1, boom. And you can see it's right next to, it's hugging the 2.5 minute mark. So there you are at 2 minutes. Stop. Let me put this on the wrist. Okay, so here we go. My wrists are 7.5, so fairly average, not too big, not too small. It does wear very well. I was when I took it out of the box, it was a little heavy, and I thought, oh man, this is going to be just uncomfortable. But it sits on the wrist very well. The lug to lug, we're at 50, and the way the strap comes down, it just sits very nice. The bottom of the watch case is beveled up, so the pushers sit high and nice off your wrist. So to operate the watch while it's on the wrist, which is where you're going to do it, it's very comfortable. So, would I like it to be a little thinner? Sure, but I think if they did that, then it's harder to push the push buttons. So overall, wearing it is been very nice. I do like the buckle with the vintage logo, and I did get some nice comments on the strap. People that I showed this watch to, that was one of the first things they commented. It said, "Oh, I really like the strap." So all in all, very easy to wear, very comfortable. It's a chronograph. Of course, you're wearing a larger watch, but definitely a comfortable watch to wear. Hey, so one thing that I need to mention here is the Formula One relationship with Tag Heuer, or back in the 60s Heuer. I'm an F1 fan and lucky to live in central Texas, where we have a purpose-built F1 track. So lucky, so lucky. And interesting fact in researching this watch is that Tag Heuer was the first non-cigarette manufacturer to sponsor a Formula One team. So, and now, of course, Tag Heuer sponsors the Red Bull racing team, and for years sponsored McLaren. So this watch definitely does have some lineage, some history in the past. I mean, people that have worn the Autavia watches, Mario Andretti, Emerson Fittipaldi, Gilles Villeneuve, on and on. This watch kind of has a name for a German F1 driver, Jochen Rindt. And even Steve McQueen has been known to wear an Autavia. So definitely some sporting heritage with the Autavia line. So I guess my takeaway, I talked about some of my dislikes. What do I like about the watch? Well, overall, I think the design of the watch is great. It has that vintage feel, and it really pulls that aesthetic off. It goes with a wide variety of different clothing options, being the black and with the white sub-registers here. The bezel hour, the hour markers here on the bezel, another plus for me. This makes the watch very versatile, right? So you could be timing, hey, kids, go practice piano. I could start this, 30 minutes is up. Okay, you're good. But when I'm traveling, to have this work as a GMT type function, I like that. I think that's gives the watch a lot of versatility. I like the way they put the date in the sub-register. So, modern concessions, you need a date on a watch, but they hit it very well. and the feel of the movement with the vertical clutch, the way that this stops and starts. I think the movement has something different than what you're going to get with the ubiquitous 7750. So overall, I think TAG Heuer did a really good job on the design of this watch. This watch comes in at $5,150 on a brown leather strap. If you want the bracelet option, that is $5,300, and that's US dollars. So once again, this is the TAG Heuer Autavia. Hey, thanks for watching. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up, and be sure to subscribe to Watchuseek to keep track on all the videos, and don't hesitate to leave a comment below. Thanks for watching.